Welcome to Crossroads Church. Thank you for making this time part of your week. If you are new to Crossroads, you might be asking yourself, what is this place all about? Well, it's pretty simple. Peace on earth. We are an open and affirming community of people committed to following the peacemaking path of Jesus. And this peacemaking path leads us to focus our work on rewriting what we call the 5 unacceptable truths. These unacceptable truths are 5 realities that hinder human flourishing and destroy peace on earth. Together, we work to replace spiritual emptiness with spiritual vitality, poverty with physical and financial flourishing, fear of the other with inclusion and affirmation, illiteracy with education and opportunity, and modern-day slavery with freedom. This is what we mean when we say, hope is here.
Hi there, and welcome to Crossroads Online-Only Weekend. My name is Michael Molasaw, and I'm the Community and Connections Director. If you happen to be tuning in for the first time, you picked a good week. Our entire community is joining digitally with no in-person gathering. We hope that you find room to breathe this Memorial Day weekend, and thanks for making Crossroads part of that time. Here's what you can expect for the rest of the broadcast. We'll be sharing 2 new music videos and a few announcements. You'll see an interview with Ryan and research psychologist Randy Swaim, where they'll dive into resiliency and grief. Then we'll share a short blessing and have you on your way to enjoy the rest of your weekend. So again, thanks for tuning in and enjoy this next song.
Never said it would be easy. Never said there'd be no pain. But you promised you'd go with me, and your promises you always keep. Well, I confess how much I need you. I confess that I am weak. Can't promise I won't fail you, but your promises will not fail me. When I'm in the valley, I will fear no evil. When enemies surround me, you prepare a table. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. There is beauty in the struggle. won't waste a single day. Your presence is my shelter. Your presence is my victory. Yeah. When I'm in the valley, I will fear no evil. When enemies surround me, you prepare a table. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. When I'm in the valley, I will fear no evil. Enemies surround me, you prepare a table. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. I can't see it all. I have seen enough to know. Oh, you are faithful. I can't see it all. I have seen enough to know. Oh, you are faithful. I can't see it all. I have seen enough to know. Oh, you are faithful. I can't see it all. I have seen enough to know. Oh, you are faithful. When I'm in the valley, I will fear no evil. Enemies surround me, you prepare a table. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. When I'm in the valley, I will fear no evil. Enemies surround me, you prepare a table. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me.
Hi Crossroads, I'm Em, and I'm the Director of Camps and Student Ministry. I've got a couple of announcements for you. Even though we're all joining digitally, we still want to connect. Please take a minute to pull up your digital Connect card, either through the Crossroads app weekend section or at crossroadscolorado.com/Connect card. If this is your first time connecting this morning, we have a gift for you. It's a book called The God We Never Knew. It's especially helpful if you are dissatisfied or deconstructing ways of thinking about God that you were given but no longer make sense to you or cause you harm along the way. Check the box on your digital Connect card and we will ship that to you this week. One of our core values at Crossroads is generosity. Your donations are helping rewrite those 5 unacceptable truths and create peace on earth through our programs and partnerships. It's easy to donate digitally through the Crossroads app. Find the donation button in the weekend section or the home screen. You can also go to crossroadscolorado.com/give. No matter how you give, thanks for donating to the peacemaking work that makes a difference in the world around us. Well, it's finally summertime, and this year we're looking forward to a series of Crossroads meetups where you can hang out with Crossroads friends at events in the community and enjoy all that Northern Colorado has to offer. The first meetup is coming up on June 1st at the Be Kind FOCO Kindness Fest and Expo. This Saturday event runs from 11 to 2 in Old Town Square, Fort Collins. Find details in the app and we hope to meet you there. Finally, the 3rd annual Partners in Hope Gala is coming up on June 8th. It's a fundraiser to benefit our global and local partners. This year's theme is Bring the Change, and well, we'll hope we'll do just that. Check this video out. gala is such a fun time to come together and support our partners that are working in communities to rewrite the 5 unacceptable truths. Tickets are on sale only through June 2nd, so don't miss your opportunity to buy your ticket and invite a generous friend. Find details on the homepage of the Crossroads app or at crossroadscolorado.com/gala. That's all the announcements I have for you. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back in the building next Sunday.
Hey, happy Memorial Day weekend, everyone. And thank you for taking some time to tune in for our online only experience. Hopefully you're having some room to breathe. And this is one of my favorite things that we've started to do here at Crossroads is to do these online only experiences a few times a year, kind of a restful weekend for our building itself, volunteers, staff. And so, thank you for tuning in. And one thing I love about this time is we have, for the past few times, had some conversations going. And that's what we want to do today as well. It is Memorial Day weekend. It's a weekend where we remember those, particularly in our culture, Memorial Day is about remembering those who have given their lives in service to our country. But it's also a time to remember people who we have lost, who are no longer with us. And a huge part of that remembering is something called grief. And that's what we want to talk about today in kind of our special edition of our Mainsail series, where we can really talk about resilience as it relates to grief. And to do that today, we are with Randy Swaim. Randy and his wife, Sandy, have been a part of Crossroads for a few years.
A few years, starting in around 2000.
2000, so 24 years, yeah. 24 years. And you might have seen Randy playing bass. You might have seen him in other conversations like this. We've called upon him to help us with his expertise and offer us his insight and wisdom. And we also are a little sad that Randy and Sandy are moving to Phoenix area to be with family, though. Yes. Triplet, great.
Twins.
Oh, sorry. Twin. Great.
Don't make it harder on my granddaughter.
I know, I was thinking of the Andersons, right? I was thinking of Dennis and his triplet grandkids, but you have twin great-grandchildren.
Yes.
And so you all are making the journey to go be with them in this season, and that's going to be awesome. So, Randy, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. Why don't we start with, tell a little bit about what you do over at CSU. You are a research psychologist.
Yes.
And tell us about what you've done there, maybe what you're currently doing, and then we'll start talking about this thing called grief.
Well, I teach classes at CSU. I've taught a number of different classes, but I just taught my last class. It's kind of good and also kind of sad because I'm going to miss it. But then I also run a research center that's devoted to studying substance use among American Indian kids on reservations. And so that's a project that's been going on since 1974. And I took it over about 15 years ago, and now someone is going to be taking it over for me when we leave. Wow.
What a legacy. That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Randy. And I really am looking forward to this conversation. We've had conversations about this in kind of smaller settings and just kind of sidebars. We've had lots of fun conversations, actually, but I want to talk about grief today. Grief is a word that gets thrown out there. It intersects our work here quite often when we're doing soul care, spiritual care of people. Grief enters our lives from all kinds of sectors. Sometimes when we think of grief, we only think of death and dying, but really that's not true, right?
Right.
Grief comes from lots of things, loss.
Yeah, grief is basically a loss experience. It's a natural experience, a response to loss. And you're right that most often we think, well, grief has to do with someone has died in my life. But I mean, there are all many other types of losses. We have losses of relationships, loss of a job, loss of economic standing, loss of a pet.
Yeah.
You know, so for some people, the loss of a pet can be just as painful as the loss of a loved one. And so we don't want to minimize any of these experiences of loss.
Yeah, I love what you said. It's an experience of loss. I love what you said. It's natural.
It's natural,
it's normal
absolutely.
to have that loss. So from a clinical perspective, as we think about it, like what do we know about grief itself? Like what's the kind of latest thinking, scholarship on this topic?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm not an expert on grief. It's not my area of expertise, but hopefully we can share some things that will be helpful and useful. First of all, something very simple, something that we all know. That is that grief is universal. I mean, we're just not going to escape it. You know, we all have loss experiences, and it's something that we all have to go through at some point in our lives. And there are some costs if we do not grieve or if we do not fully grieve.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing we see sometimes is people trying to suppress grief, avoid it, pretend it doesn't exist. There's sometimes a stigma that grief is a type of weakness.
Yes.
So what does happen? What's at stake if we do that? Is that healthy? Is that unhealthy? What happens?
Well, obviously, grief is a very stressful time. And when we do avoid it, when we do not allow ourselves to fully grieve, there are both emotional consequences and there are physical consequences. I mean, whenever we are confronted with stress, our body experiences a buildup of stress hormones. And that happens with grief. And these stress hormones can lead to problems, physical problems down the line. So grief, incomplete grief, has been associated with increased risk, believe it or not, for cancer, for increased blood pressure. So these are some of the things that these stress hormones can create a greater risk for if we do not really allow ourselves to grieve fully. And of course, there's the emotional toll that grief takes, being depression. And it's important to mention that the grief and depression are not the same thing.
Yeah, unpack that, because sometimes maybe people think they are the same. And
I mean, they share a lot of the similar characteristics. I mean, we obviously feel sad, we feel depressed, but grief is, as we said, a natural response to loss, where depression or clinical depression is not something that we would call natural, okay? Now, when someone doesn't allow themselves to grieve, they can move themselves into a clinical depression.
Because depression oftentimes has to do with chemical makeup.
Yes,
And is that what you mean when you said a phrase that I wanted you to maybe unpack a little bit? You said incomplete grief.
Sometimes people will start the process of grief, but then they short circuit it. Okay, they find themselves busying themselves with all the same things, getting involved in activities that just kind of help them to avoid the process, and so they don't allow themselves to fully grieve.
Okay, and those types of actions, behaviors would be considered somewhat unhealthy, because if we don't allow grief to not run its course, but if we don't allow ourselves to fully grieve, we can end up storing all these chemicals that can then lead to the physical reality of depression, which is related but different. This is what
It's
I'm hearing you
related
say.
but different.
Okay. Now I can remember kind of like as a young person in ministry, there's the stages of grief and helping people identify what stage of grief they're in. But there's a lot of talk, and it was as if it was very linear, right? That you went from one stage to the other, like life stages. Like I'm a toddler, and then I'm a preschooler, and then that was kind of the way we heard about that a lot. Is that still the case? Is that still kind of a predominant thought? Has that changed?
So you're asking me, are there stages of grief?
Yes.
Let me give you a very clear answer. Yes and no.
Yes and no. Oh, good. That's very clear. Perfect. It's perfect.
So, some of you who are listening may be familiar with the name Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was an American psychiatrist who began spending her early career in hospice centers. And she spent time with people who were in the process of dying, and also with the surrounding family members and friends. And based on her experiences, she wrote a book in 1969 called Death and Dying. And in that book, she talked about stages of grief. And this was really when people really began talking much more completely about what grief is and how it works. So she identified 5 stages of grief. The first being denial. And that's that sense that, this can't be real. This is not happening. Now, denial probably happens even more so when there's an unexpected death. But even in lingering deaths, there's still that sense that, this is just not real, and it has not sunk in. The next stage she talked about was anger. And once again, as you said, her thinking was you go through these stages sequentially. And if you haven't gone through all the stages, then you haven't done it right, okay? But anger, you can be angry at the person who has died for a sense of abandonment. You can be angry at God, okay?
Or angry at a boss, or angry at, if it wasn't death, but it was some other loss.
Or for some other loss,
some
right.
other anger.
Exactly.
Like there's some other focal point where you direct
Right.
that anger to.
And then another one that people have kind of questioned, she talked about the third stage, which is bargaining.
Yeah.
And this was true of people who were in the process of dying, trying to maybe bargain with God, just give me a few more years. But then also people who had lost a loved one, bargaining with God, thinking, maybe coming up with rather strange thoughts. If you could just bring this person back, even though, and that's going back to some of that denial, where people have not really accepted the reality of the death. And then the stage that we most often associate with grief was depression. And that's after you've gone through these early stages and finally it's sunk in that this is real. I no longer have this person. I no longer have this job. I no longer have this pet. And the depression sets in. That's what we usually associate with grief. And then the final stage being acceptance, where you really come to terms with the reality of your loss and you resolve some of the deep pain that occurs, early on and even extends for a period of time. But then finally you can think about this person without being overwhelmed, and you can return to your normal functions of life. Sometimes people take an absence of leave from work because they simply cannot manage it. So, but the thinking now is that, yes, there probably are stages, but not everyone goes through all of these stages. You may go through some of them, and you don't have to go through them in a certain order.
Yeah.
So every process of grief is unique. And so don't allow this thinking of stages causing you to think, well, I've got to do it this way, and if I don't do it this way, I'm not doing it right.
Yeah. I think of one of the things that's helped me kind of like visualize that. I remember our kids, when they were little, we would play Candyland or Chutes and Ladders. Chutes and Ladders is probably a better example, And I think of grief and the stages of grief like Chutes and Ladders or like Candyland, where like you're navigating through this reality, and then sometimes you have these days where you just feel like, man, I'm really in that acceptance phase and I'm moving forward. And then all of a sudden you hit a chute and you're right back in. And then because you think it's supposed to be linear, you feel like you failed. Like, why am I feeling this way? But to hear that, no, that's actually a very normal and healthy way to navigate.
Yes, it's part of the process. I think we can process our grief a little bit at a time. And then it's almost as though we give ourselves a break. Okay, but the important thing is that we not stay on that break, that we return back to it.
Yes, because then we end up avoiding.
Yes.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time on over the last 6 or 7 weeks is talking about resiliency, and I don't want. When I talk about resiliency and grief, it's almost this idea of to be resilient in the grief, to stay in it, not resiliency to avoid it, but what does it mean to be a person who has resiliency to welcome grief? Oftentimes when I sit with families that are dealing with loss, or I meet with a person, it might not be a death, but another loss, like I say, grief is this unwelcome dinner guest that shows up for dinner, you didn't know they were coming, and you just have to entertain them, right? You can, if you try to leave the door, they just stand outside and knock, and it just like they just want to come in and sit with you. So, what are some things that we can do for ourselves? So, healthy spirituality, I tend to think of as it relates to my relationship with myself, my relationship with others, and then my relationship with the divine, with that whatever is really real. So whatever word people use for that, our tradition we call God, Jesus, whatever. So when we talk about like that relationship with myself, and grief has come and is now a part of the dinner. It's there. Yeah. What are some things that we can do as people to navigate grief, to be resilient in grief?
Okay. Well, let me give you 3 things. Okay.
You'd be a great preacher, by the way. 3 things. That's what you got to do. I like it.
Can we write them on a board someplace?
Yeah, the fill-ins,
Yeah, fill-ins, right. So the first one is very simple, and we've already talked about it. Simply do grieve, okay? Do not allow yourself to hide from it, to avoid it, to skip it, to do it incompletely, okay? I mean, that's very simple. But it's very simple, but sometimes very hard, yeah. The second thing I would recommend is do it at your own pace, okay? I think that sometimes when people have had a loss experience, particularly with the death of a loved one, a family member, they start a grief stopwatch.
Right.
And they think, okay, I should be at this point in time. That really sets you up for failure.
Where do you think that comes from?
Well,
because it's so big. That's such a huge thing. Like we feel, or people around us, we'll talk about that, they feel like, why are you still sad? Or we say, why am I still sad? It's been a year. It's been 5 years.
Yes.
Where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from all those societal pressures, from the expectation that we need to get back into our life, okay? We need to get moving again. And I think it also comes from other people's discomfort with our grief. They want to see us feeling better. So yes, I mean, do it at your own pace. Don't have some expectations that you need to be at a certain point of time. As I said before, every grief experience is unique, and you need to just allow your process to emerge as it will. Okay?
Yeah. So that's 2. What's the
That's
third
2.
way?
I'm trying to think of what the third
I know, I
is.
distracted you. That was
You
the
did
problem.
distract me, okay.
Right. So we said, do grieve.
Okay,
grieve
I
at your
remember
pace.
my third, okay.
Yeah.
That is, do it your own way, okay.
Yes.
What I want to say about that is, I mean, we all treat emotions differently, right? Some of us are very open and free with our emotions. Others of us kind of keep it close to our vest, we don't really share our emotions. Whatever your particular mode of expressing emotions is, do it your way. Don't allow people to tell you that, you don't seem to be feeling much, okay? And just because maybe a person is not as expressive doesn't mean that the pain isn't there.
Yeah.
The pain may be very deep, but they are just not as comfortable with expressing it openly to people. The other thing is sometimes people want to shut our grief down, saying, hey, you're kind of overdoing it. This has been a long time, and you need to kind of get yourself under control. So just do it your way, and give yourself permission to experience your grief, which is your own. And it's not something that belongs to other people, even though other people will be impacted by it.
Now, so what I'm hearing you say, Randy, is there really isn't a right or wrong way to grieve, but maybe there are healthy and unhealthy ways to walk through the grieving process, or there's wise or unwise. And that is going to be very unique to the person and the circumstance. And so we have to live in the theological word of grace for ourselves to do that in a healthy way, which is hard in, I think, Western American culture that wants to say there's a right way to be anything. And then throw that into religion that loves to choose words like right and wrong, right? And live in a very dualistic, binary way of thinking. So that's challenging. Like, I would bet, I was just thinking about this, the American church, and traditionally like modern, expressive kind of, maybe even churches that have flown out of a more outward-oriented church growth mindset, we don't talk about grief because we think that it has something to do with defeat and loss. Like, I wonder how many churches across America would ever actually spend time having a conversation about grief because we just want to deal with our triumphant kind of Western way of being, which has to drive some of what we want to talk about now is, what do you do when the people around you are uncomfortable with your grief? And so now that forces us sometimes into a situation where we almost short circuit the grief and we have incomplete grief because we sense people around us are uncomfortable with it. So what do you do there? Like, how can we navigate that?
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, when we're grieving, I think we need some alone time, okay? And a lot of times we have a lot of people who come into our life, come into our sphere that maybe haven't been there for a while, relatives, okay? And that's all good, okay? That can be very helpful, but give yourself some alone time to do your grieving in private. But on the other hand, friends and family can be very helpful. I mean, I would encourage you to find people who are good listeners, not people who are wanting to say a lot, but are just good listeners and willing to hear you talk. In my own grief experiences, I lost a very close friend, one of my best friends, about 25 years ago. And there were times when I wanted to hear from other people who knew my friend things I didn't know about him, okay? So I wanted to talk, I wanted to spend time with other people, but then I also needed my own time, my private time. So find someone who is willing to be a good listener. There's other things that, sometimes if you're having trouble reaching some of the emotions that are part of your grief, photographs can be very helpful. And it's important to share with, if you're a friend of someone who's grieving, to share maybe joyful experiences and maybe sad experiences. Sometimes you think, I don't want to bring up the sad stuff because it'll make my person feel only worse. But no, people often want to hear some of those stories, even if they're rather sad stories.
And is it okay to give ourselves permission to stay away from people that can't handle our grief? Or is that being a bad person, not a good follower of Jesus in your opinion? Like, what do you think as far as like our mental, emotional health goes?
Yeah, I think we all have experiences when we have people in our life where we need to set boundaries, okay? Because they're not very helpful to us. And that can certainly happen in the process of grief. I actually wrote down some things that people might say to us.
Oh, this will be wonderful.
And I'm sure we've heard these things. So she's in a better place.
Yeah, not particularly helpful.
No, I mean, sometimes if people hear that, they think, no, the better place is to be back here with me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not very helpful. It's been a while. Aren't you over it yet? And that goes back to that issue of pace, okay? And I think that also relates to other people's discomfort with our grief. And it will make them feel better if they see us feeling better. No. He lived a long, good life.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's certainly something to be said about the tragedy of an early death. But even when a person has lived a long life, I mean, that doesn't mean that the loss is any less painful.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it can even sense, it can have a greater depth, right? Because so much of your life might have been tied to this person or thing or whatever it might be, that it's almost like, yeah, that long life was so influential and so necessary. Like, how do I go on tomorrow without being able to pick up the phone or without going to work? I mean, people go through loss when they retire from something that they've been at for 40 years. Identity is built on it, self-esteem, all these things.
And that brings up another point, and that is that some of the transformations that people go through, especially when it's been a close family member, just loss of identity.
Yeah.
So it may be the identity of a spouse. I'm no longer a spouse anymore, or a partner anymore, or I'm no longer. Maybe I have to become the breadwinner.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you have to adopt a new identity, a new role in life, and that can be as important in the process of kind of renegotiating what your life is now, in addition to all the emotional processing.
It's interesting. I just sat with a family last week, and in the service and in talking with them, like, so much of our identity is built on our relationships with people, with our jobs, with our geography, and those form our identity. And then when there's loss, that thing that held us in its gravitational space is not there anymore.
Yeah.
And so we're almost left floating around. Like, there's now a black hole where something that it offered us a sense of security, and now our identity is shifting. And there's something about grief that, I was mentioning this to you, like, grief is almost like our physical body responding to the spiritual transformation, like re-identifying of ourselves without this thing or person any longer. And that's gut-wrenching. Like, sometimes I think it's like having surgery and being awake for it.
Yeah.
Like, you need to have the surgery, right? You have to have that. But that's what sometimes it's like, there's those moments where it's just, you want out, right? But because it's transforming us, it's shaping us. And it's not always like bad things that happen that produce loss. I think of like, I've met with a few people who are retiring. And there's
You're talking about me, right?
I'm talking about you, right? Like, and retirement is tricky because it's tricky, especially for people who tend to find a sense of identity in and value in their production and in what they're contributing. And now there's this retirement that's like a celebration, and people are giving you a cake, and you've actually like saved up enough money to be able to retire. But yet there's a deep sense of grief and loss, because it's not necessarily something bad has happened, but we're being reshaped. Reformed almost. It's
that's a big part of that emotional processing. We think of the pain, but then there's also this renegotiation of all these new roles we may have to encounter, which we haven't encountered before.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're running out of time, but I do want to ask this question, and it's a bonus question for you, right?
Okay.
So we've talked about kind of our own personal relationship to grief and how we walk through that, some strategies. We've talked about that other person who is uncomfortable with our grief. I think one of the things we're oftentimes not good at is being the person next to someone in grief. So like, if you could tell us like one thing that we could all work on that would make us better partners in grief, right? That would make us to be a better, what we oftentimes in spirituality say, a non-anxious presence, right? Like, what could we do to be better grief partners?
Okay, good. I like that question. I mentioned this before, and I think the first thing I would say is be a good listener. Be a good listener. We often feel prompted to have to fill that space of silence, but sometimes the best thing that we can do is to simply be present. Okay, and if it's someone you have a close relationship with, and then this has been part of your journey with this person, maybe even touch. For some people that would not be appropriate, but you can monitor that. I mentioned this before. Sharing photographs, sharing stories, but just giving the person the space and the time to share both their own memories and also to simply be present and be quiet.
And is part of listening and being present knowing when to ask questions too? Like, is that appropriate to ask a person about their loss? Like, if whether it's a person or a pet or a job, or like, is part of being present and a good listener asking questions about that loss?
I mean, don't stop yourself from asking good questions, but don't overwhelm the person with questions. Yeah.
So things that I think are big takeaways for us as we think about how to be people who recognize the health in grief and to fully grieve. I love that. Don't incomplete your grief. I love that what you said. But this idea that grief is healthy is something we need to stay in. That I hear you say there's no right way to grieve. There are unhealthy ways and there are healthy ways. To come alongside people with an open heart to listen is very powerful. And to grieve sometimes by ourselves. And it's okay to put a boundary up for people who have very niceties to say but aren't super helpful. And then maybe a thing we can do is avoid trying to say the niceties that we think will make someone feel better, but really are not. They're just making us feel better, giving us something to say. I love it. So, well, Randy, I really thank you so much for giving us your wisdom and having this conversation. And I do think these are ways in which we can grow our resilience. And I think from a spiritual perspective, grief is an opportunity to lean into our understanding of the divine. And here, my understanding of the divine, Crossroads, the goodness of God is not that God is the one who does or takes or gives, but that God is that love that is present in the giving, in the taking, in the losing, in the winning. There's a presence that's there with us that can offer wisdom and guidance and strength. And I think that's part of the conversation as well. So, well, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Again, super sad to know that Phoenix is getting you, but we're happy for you and Sandy. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Stick around for one other announcement and a blessing for today.
Flood this heart with assurance of your mercy. Fill this mind with the knowledge of your love. Hold me fast through the deep and steady current. How long till these tears are gone? Every hour, awake me to your presence. Shine your light brighter than the dawn. Send your joy, illuminate the darkness. How long till these tears are gone? How long till these tears are gone? Every lie, every shadow is uncovered by your love. For every lie, every shadow is uncovered by your love.
We hope that you're walking away from this broadcast feeling renewed and refreshed, with maybe some thoughts to ponder over the coming days. With that, I offer you this blessing as you go your separate ways this week. This Memorial Day weekend, may you find your heart full of gratitude and hope. May your heart be aware of the important and healthy experience of grief. If you're grieving today, may you find comfort and strength in God and those closest to you. May your memories fill your heart with joy, laughter, sadness, and every other needed emotion so that your grief may be full and whole. May all of us be compassionate partners in the grief of others. May we listen well and offer the beautiful gift of our presence. May we learn to be comfortable with our own discomfort with the grief of others, knowing that grief is not something we fix in someone, but something we feel in solidarity with those who have lost. Amen. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.